Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. And I hope you're having some fun. Yesterday in our critter chat, we talked about bees, which are some of the smallest of all animals. Today, we're going to talk about the biggest. Today, we are talking about baleen whales, the largest of all whales. And the baleen whales is a group of 11 different species. Some people say 12, so it's still being decided how many species really count and how many are just subspecies. I apologize for if there's noise in the background. Today is trash day, so the garbage trucks are driving around the neighborhood right now. They're usually done by now, so I didn't anticipate that they would be driving today. So first of all, we've talked a little bit about dolphins in the past. And today we're going to talk about a group of whales called the baleen whales. Now let's discuss what that means. Baleen is what they have instead of teeth for many of the large species of whales. So they don't have teeth. Instead, what they have are stiff fringed plates that are called baleen that hang down from their upper jaw, and it's composed of keratin, which is a substance that our fingernails and our hair is made out of. And baleen whales use these giant baleens. They're kind of like big combs, if you can imagine big combs or bristly brushes that hang down from their jaw. They use those to filter their food. And so the baleen comes down from the top jaw. They'll open their mouth, take in a big gulp of water. With that, there's a lot of animals in there that they are trying to eat. They'll close their mouth, and as they do so, the water kind of rushes out, and the baleen acts like a filter and traps all the food inside to help them eat. So what they're trying to eat are usually small things. Some baleen eat things like plankton or krill, little tiny like shrimp-like characters. Others will eat some smaller fish. Typically they're the schooling fish, things like sardine or mackerel, which are still only like this big. They're not very big fish at all. So they're usually not going after anything huge. Some will eat some squid and other little tiny critters called copepods. But the baleen whales eat huge amounts of these quantities. During their peak breeding season, a blue whale can eat 8,000 pounds of krill in a day. That's as much as an elephant weighs. So that's a lot of food that a blue whale can eat. So scientists have identified the baleen whales and broken them down into 3, or some people say 4 families. So we'll kind of go over that first and talk about the different species that are in each family. So first of all, whales are mammals, right? So that means that they have hair, they give live birth, they feed their babies milk, they're warm-blooded, and yeah, they definitely have skeleton, they have bones, right? So they're mammals, but they're also in the order called Cetacea, which is for the whales, and then it's broken down into 2 suborders. So the ones we're talking about today are called the Mystici. I don't think I'm saying that right. I don't know this word. Mysticeti whales. They're the baleen whales, the ones that don't have teeth, that have this comb filter that hangs down from their top jaw. So underneath that group, then there's 3 families, or 4 if depending on who you talk to. The first family is called the rorqual whales. That comes from a Norwegian word. These whales typically have a very small dorsal fin, which is the fin on the very back. And then they have short baleen plates, so those comb-like structures in their mouth, they don't hang down very far. For blue whales, those are 3 feet. So 3 feet, that's considered short compared to some of the other baleen whales that have bigger plates. In a minke whale, which is also in the rorqual family, they're only 5 to 8 inches long, so they're pretty small baleen plates. And then the rorqual whales typically have long, streamlined bodies, so they're really long and skinny, and that makes them very fast as well. And then they also have a lot of grooves on their throat, and you've maybe seen this in some videos. I'll be putting up a video that showcases this really well later today. That allows their throat and their mouth to really expand to take in that water, and then it pushes the water out and kind of collapses back down. So they have a lot of throat grooves. So that's the rorqual whales, and that includes 6 species: the minkies, the says, the birds, the blue, the fin, and the humpback. So those are many of the, well, actually the 3 biggest types of whales are all in that group, with the blue whale being the largest, and says and fins being second and third. Then the next family of whales is called the right whales. They got this name from whalers because they found that the whales in this group were the most ideal to hunt, because they had really big heads and contained a lot of the oil that they were going after when they were whaling. So this includes either 3 or 4 species. This is where the big discrepancy happens as to how many families. The bowhead whale, the northern right whale, the southern right whale, and then possibly the pygmy right whale. Some scientists group the pygmy right whale in a family of its own. So, because it has a few differences. The right whales have smooth throats. They don't have the throat grooves, other than the pygmy right whale does. It has 2 throat grooves. And then they have very large, disproportionately large heads. So their head is very, very huge on these whales. And they also have very long baleen. The baleen of a bowhead whale is the largest, and it's 13 feet in length. So that's more than twice my height. I'm 6'1". So imagine 2 of me stacked on top. That's how big these comb-like structures are on a bowhead whale. And most of these right whales don't have a dorsal fin at all. Again, the pygmy right whales, kind of the exception there, and it has a tiny little dorsal fin. And they usually have very huge arched jaws, so they look kind of funny if you look at them from the side. They have a very unique head shape for the bowhead and the right whales. And then the third whale family under this group is called the gray whale. And for some reason, the gray whales are just kind of unique and don't really relate real closely to the others. They have a few throat grooves. They have short baleen plates. They have a short dorsal hump, not really a fin, and it's followed by a series of bumps. Now, gray whales are a whale that is very near to us here in my backyard in Los Angeles. I have seen gray whales from the shoreline in California multiple times. So gray whales are a whale species that is very frequently seen here in California. So with all of these whales, these 11 species of whales, they are typically highly migratory. So that means that they migrate throughout the different months of the year. Typically in the warmer months, they go north up to like Alaska area to get food in the rich waters of the polar seas, where there's a lot of food to be had during the summer months up there. And then in the winter, when it's cold, they go south down to areas around like Mexico or Hawaii, different places where it's a little warmer. And those waters don't have as much food for them, but that's an important area for them to give birth and also for their breeding grounds. So that typically happens in the warmer waters. Now I say north and south, that's for the northern hemisphere. The whales that live south of the equator are doing the opposite times of the year because their seasons are flipped. So they would be near the equator during like what is our winter time, and or the other way around. So the whale species typically, if there's blue whales in the North Pacific, they don't interact with the blue whales in the South Pacific because they're in different places at different times of the year because the seasons are flipped. Now, most of the whales, they are typically live fairly close to the coastline, although there are multiple species that disappear for big chunks of the year, and we don't know where they go. Um, Whales are still something we're learning a lot about because we typically only see whales when they come to the surface to breathe. And during that time when they're near the surface or shortly before or after getting a breath, we're only seeing them about 20% of their time. And sometimes they can swim very far distances in short periods of time, and we don't know where they go. So they're still very elusive, and we still don't know everything about whales. We have a lot to learn. Now let's talk about the largest animal that has ever lived on Earth. That is the blue whale. Blue whales, the record was recorded back in the days of whaling, and it was a female of the southern blue whales, so the ones that live in the southern hemisphere. They tend to be bigger. Females tend to be bigger than males with big whales, and the southern hemisphere species individuals tend to be bigger than the northern hemisphere. So this was a southern hemisphere female blue whale, and she was recorded to be 112 feet in length. To give you a little estimate, from me to the fence all the way back there is only about 65 feet. So it would be about the length of two of those for her entire length. So she was a very huge female, and the record weight on a blue whale is 419,000 pounds. So definitely the biggest animals that ever lived. Now, not necessarily the longest. There are some jellyfish that get really long tentacles that can be about in that same length. And some dinosaur scientists say that some dinosaurs could be that same length. However, neither the jellyfish nor the dinosaurs would weigh anywhere close to that. Because the dinosaur, most of its body that makes up that length would be a really long skinny neck and a pretty long skinny tail. And the jellyfish is just a bunch of long tentacles for the most part. So blue whales for sure the largest animal that has ever lived on Earth, and they're still here living today. They average between 82 and 89 feet is their average of what they see now. But that may be because we haven't gotten big numbers back yet since the ban for whaling has kind of ended. So let's talk a little bit about their bodies and how they work. I found this part exceptionally interesting. So on the whale, they have their head, right? And then they have these big flippers, some bigger than others. Humpback whales have the biggest. They're called pectoral flippers, okay? And it's kind of like our arms. They move them to swim. And like skeleton-wise, the bones in those actually match up quite closely with land mammals. In fact, most of the whales even have 4 digits out on the end of the flipper. Now it's covered with a lot of other material besides the bones, but if you look at the skeleton, they almost have 4 fingers out at the very end of their flipper. So that skeletal wise, they definitely resemble a lot of other mammals. You could look at, say like a cat or a dog skeleton, you would see those digits as well. And so whales definitely have a skeletal relationship that corresponds with land animals. So also on the whales, on their tails, the very end of their tail has these 2 big kind of flippers at the end of the tail. Those are called flukes. The interesting thing I found out about flukes is that those are just large tail pads. There's no bones in that part of their tail. So that whole big part isn't really bone, and it's not really muscle either. It's just kind of organic material. It's kind of cartilage. The tail bone ends before the flukes, before the end of the tail, and there's no bones in those back flipper tail portions. Now for whales to breathe, they have what we call a blowhole. And it's similar to our nose, except it's located on the back of their head, which when they're swimming is on top, which makes sense. That's the easiest way for them to get a breath, is the very top of their head as it comes to the water. Their nose is up here. So for all the baleen whales, the whales we're talking about today, they have two blowholes. So kind of like us with two nostrils, they have two blowholes. And those have a very tight seal that makes them absolutely watertight. So when they come up and take a breath, they open that and they kind of push all the air out, and that pushes any water that's around the edge of the blowhole up into the air as well. That's called a blow, and that's a really easy way for people who are doing any whale watching or research on whales. They look for that. They look for the blows of the whales. Now for the blue whale, the biggest, those can be 30 feet into the air of the spray coming out when they come up for a breath. And different species of whales, the spray is a little bit different shaped. So some are kind of taller, some are kind of wider, and they can, people who are really good at identifying whales can tell you what kind it is, sometimes by just the shape of the spray as it comes out when they come up to take a breath. So they also have excellent hearing. You may know some about this with like the humpback whales, seen songs. They make a lot of vocalizations. Specifically, the male humpbacks make a lot of noise. They call it songs because it's very melodic in its tone. And they only sing those songs during their breeding season in their breeding grounds. They don't sing those songs the rest of the year. So scientists have a pretty good idea that those are to either help attract mates or help males know where different males are so that they can kind of not all go to the same spot at the same time. Although they do that, once a female enters the area, they'll kind of compete for her attention for breeding rights. But they're still trying to figure out a lot about whale sounds, the sounds they make, the clicks, the other noises. But most of it is hard for us to study because it's low frequency, below our ability to hear. So with computers and with hydrophones, which are microphones underwater, they're able to record a lot of those sounds and noises and analyze those in ways that we would never be able to hear them otherwise. They're still figuring out how far away those sounds can travel in water, because it moves, sound waves move much different in water than they do in the air. And they think that whales can communicate many, many miles away from each other through these very low frequency sounds that carry a far distance. Now, with their hearing being so good, their other senses are not quite as well developed. There's some that we still don't know. We don't know, for instance, if they have a sense of taste. We don't think they have a very good sense of smell because that part of their anatomy is very small and underdeveloped as adults. And so we don't think that they have a very good sense of smell. They have some good vision, but we don't know how good their vision really is. But their sense of hearing is probably their most important sense. So let's talk a little bit about baby whales. So a female baleen whale, these are the huge, huge whales again, they are pregnant, or their gestation period is between 10 and 14 months. And that seems like a long time, right? That's longer than humans are pregnant for. But if you compare it to some other animals, it's really not that long. That's less than a giraffe. It's way less than an elephant. Elephants can be pregnant for 20 to 22 months. So whales are quite a bit shorter, almost half of what an elephant is pregnant for, which I found quite interesting. And of those babies, the blue whale being the biggest species, the blue whale's baby is also the biggest baby that's born on Earth. And blue whale calves can be 23 feet long when they are born. That's huge. That's a very, very big, big baby. And they will weigh between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds at birth. So when they're born, they're already the size of an adult female elephant. That's a really big baby. They will stay with their mom for up to their first year, nursing from very, very fatty milk that she produces. It's between 40 and 50% fat in the milk, so the baby's able to grow really quickly. They estimate that a baby blue whale grows about 200 pounds a day. So they definitely grow quite fast. Now let's talk a little bit about whales and their status of being endangered. So from about the 1200s up until the 1980s, whales were aggressively hunted by people. They were hunted for a variety of different things. One of the biggest was, early on at least, was the oil. Whales have really thick layer of fat that helps keep them warm in the cold ocean, called blubber. And if you melt that down, that becomes a lot of oil. And some whales, like the right whales, they have the most fat and most oil in them. And so that oil was used for heating of people's houses and burning in things like lanterns. And so that was what it was typically hunted for. It was also used to make soaps and fabrics and clothing textiles. And then they would use the baleen, or those crazy toothbrush combs. They would use those to make corsets and whips and umbrellas and skirts and brushes and all sorts of other things. So they would try to use a lot of parts for the whale, especially in those early days of hunting. But they continued to hunt whales for many, many years. And for a while, they started to notice that some whale species were becoming less and less common. And so in 1946, 14 countries got together and they signed an international whaling convention. So they had a big meeting and they said, hey, let's try to regulate the hunting a little bit so that we don't hunt these whales to extinction. And so they started to say, like, oh, maybe these kind of whales, let's not hunt so much. Probably the right whales. Those are still really endangered. Also the bowheads. And then they started to go down the list. So once those whales were kind of like, oh, let's not hunt these, then they started going after things like the blue whales, the fin whales, the sei whales. And then as those kind of got less and less, they would move on to something else. So in 1972, the United States issued the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which is a very strong law that protects all marine mammals. So that includes all the seals, all the sea lions, all the dolphins, all the whales. It protects all of them, and you could no longer hunt any of those animals in United States waters. And that was kind of paving the way to protect those species in a bigger global setting. So that was in 1972. In 1983, the Endangered Species Act came along and declared 6 different species of whales as endangered. And those were the blue whale, the bowhead whale, the fin whale, the humpback whale, the right whale, and the sei whale. Oh, they actually declared 7, and the gray whale. And then in 1993, the gray whale was taken off that list because it had rebounded back to its pre-whaling numbers. So that was good news on the gray whale. It had rebounded enough that it got taken off the endangered species list. Those other 6 are all still on the endangered species list. In 1986, there was a moratorium on commercial whaling, and most countries agreed to this and said, we're not going to hunt whales anymore. They're going to be safe. We're not going to hunt them. And I say most because there are 3 countries that still prevalently hunt whales today. Those are Japan, Norway, and Iceland. And in recent times, Norway has actually become the most hunting of whales. They hunt the most whales out of any of those 3. But all 3 of those countries still hunt whales on a fairly commercial basis, and they still kind of don't think it's a huge problem to be hunting whales. So although whaling lasted for many, many centuries, we are lucky that some of these whale species, although they got very limited numbers and were very endangered, some of them have started to come back. One of those is the biggest of all whales, the blue whale. And blue whale numbers in recent years have come up in some parts of their range. And one of the best places to see blue whales is in the summertime, just off of Long Beach, California. And that's where I previously worked at the Long Beach Aquarium. And there were were boats that would go out from there and look for whales all the time. And many of my coworkers worked on those boats as educators and helped people see those whales. I myself never got trained to do that during my time at the aquarium. That was something I was looking forward to doing kind of before this whole shutdown thing happened. So maybe I'll look forward to that for the future. But I've still never seen a blue whale. It is definitely on one of my goals to see a blue whale. And I live pretty close to an area where they are frequently seen during the summer months. Now, after they used to be seen really heavily in like July, August, and September. And the last 5 years, it's moved further and further up in the year. So now it's like May, June, July that they see them. So they don't see them in late summer anymore. They see them more in early summer. And after they see them near Long Beach, they kind of swim up the coast and they see them again in like Washington State area. And then they disappear and we don't really know where they go after that. And we don't know where they go until they show up near Long Beach again. Now, one thing that's kind of crazy about Long Beach, in Long Beach, California is a huge port. Lots of cargo ships come in and out of there every day. And the port of Long Beach, combined with its neighboring ports of San Pedro and Los Angeles, which all are together and kind of function as one giant port, that's the busiest port in the United States and one of the busiest ports in the world. But whale researchers have been able to document the path that the whales use as they're in that area. Not only the blue whales, but also the gray whales migrate up and down the California coastline twice a year. In late winter, they're headed south. And then, well, I shouldn't say late winter. Yeah, December, January, they're headed south. And then they go north again in like March and April. They go down to Mexico, have their babies. And when the babies are big enough and strong enough, they start swimming back north up to Alaska. And so since it's very well documented where these whales go, they've put very strict restrictions on where the boats can go, coming in and out of the ports, and where the boats have to go slower speeds to avoid collision with whales. So science has really played an important part of conservation in helping to protect the whales in those local waters. Now, it's not just blue whales and gray whales there. They also see fin whales and sei whales and humpback whales. They see many, many kinds of dolphins. They occasionally see orcas and some of the other whale species out there as well. So I'm happy that in an area that has as many people as California, and with one of the busiest ports in the world, that people are still willing to listen to scientists and conservationists and make small changes that can help protect the wildlife there. So I'm very proud that I live in a state that regards science so heavily. So let's talk a little bit about my experience with whales. I haven't seen a blue whale, but I have seen some of the others. I've seen gray whales up and down the coastline of California multiple times. I've never seen them from a boat out on the water, although I've gone looking for them twice out on a boat. I have seen them from the shore countless times. I've seen them from the beach, I've seen them from a high cliff, and I've seen them in both those type of places multiple different times when I've been near the coastline. So that's very exciting to me to be able to see whales. I always marvel at it, and I always try to point it out to people who are nearby me when I see them, whether they're interested or not. I have also seen humpback whales over in Hawaii. The photo I posted earlier today, that's a beautiful sunset of the ocean. If you look just to the right side of where the sun is, you can also see a bit of a whale at the surface there. I have a squirrel who's staring me down in my yard right now, trying to figure out where he's going. What are you doing, buddy? But yeah, so that photo I took off the big island of Hawaii, and that's a humpback whale out there in the Pacific Ocean just off the big island of Hawaii. I also saw humpbacks off of Oahu in 3 different places around the island during my time that I lived in Hawaii. So I'm very excited that I've seen humpback whales in Hawaii. I've seen gray whales here in California. And on my trip to Alaska, we saw a whale. We don't know what kind it was. I'm thinking now it was probably a gray whale. Some people thought it was a humpback whale. I don't think it was big enough. Humpback whales are quite a bit bigger than gray whales. but I was still kind of a kid at that time, so I don't really know how to tell the difference then, and so I don't know what it was that I saw. But it is exciting to see whales. I highly recommend it. When things open back up a little bit more, look into that if you're interested into ways you can see whales. Off the coast of California is actually a really great spot to see wild whales. Now let's talk a bit about ways that you can help whales out. There's some good things that you can do to help the ocean systems out in general. The first is to limit pollution, and that's multiple kinds of pollution. That's things like chemical spills in and around your house. If you have a car that drips oil, get that fixed, because that oil, when it rains, gets washed into rivers, and then from the rivers goes down into the ocean. All sorts of trash on the ground, same sort of thing can happen there. But also be mindful about the air pollution you cause. That's causing our planet to warm up, and that causes ocean temperatures to raise, as well as more acidification in the ocean, which throws the ecosystem balance off. And with whales, it especially will affect their food source. Those little tiny guys, the shrimp and the krill, some of those copepods, all of those animals need very specific conditions to thrive, and the whales need those for the whales to thrive. And if those food sources disappear, the whales are also going to disappear. And so warmer seas is not a good thing for whales. Also, limit your use of plastics. Plastics never fully decompose, so plastics are here always. Once they're created, the plastic is always here. It can be recycled and made into other forms of plastic and used again. That is the best thing you can do with plastic, but if you can avoid plastic, that's even better. Especially things like the little grocery bags that you get like produce in. If we can limit those, if they end up in the ocean, look a lot like a jelly and can be eaten by many sea creatures. And little bits of plastic get mixed in with the shrimp and other krill and other animals that the whales eat, and they end up eating the plastics as well. And the plastics have a hard time getting out of their digestive system, and sometimes start to fill their stomachs up with the plastic, and that can cause long-term health problems for them. Another way you can help out the ocean is by, if you eat sustainable seafood, make sure you know where it's coming from, how it was caught, and make sure that it was harvested in a way that doesn't harm other species or take too much out of the ocean at a time. Easy ways to do that is if you can look for things that are US sourced. That's usually a very good indicator that was caught in an ethical way and didn't harm other species in the process of fishing for it. And the final way you can help out the ocean and whales and all animals is, especially this year, it's an election year in the United States. I encourage you to be registered to vote and to vote for candidates and policies. And if there's any ballot propositions, read those carefully and understand the environmental impact that those can have on our planet and the animals that we share our home with. Those are all things we can do to make the world a better place for the animals who share Earth with us. That concludes what I have to share with you today in our Critter Chat about baleen whales. I'll be putting up some videos and other information later today on the Facebook profile, so make sure you check that out. And as always, I'll upload this full video onto Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So if you missed part of it, you can catch it there later today. Also, feel free to like, share, subscribe, and follow on any of the Zoo Nerd platforms across Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And until tomorrow, take care, be happy, be healthy. We'll see you then. Bye.